Hey guys, tonight we find ourselves on the open sea, a vast and restless expanse, stretching infinitely in all directions, glittering faintly beneath an endless spray of stars. The rhythmic sway of a Viking longship carries you forward gently, the creak of timber whispering secrets older than your wildest dreams. Salt spray brushes your cheeks, cold but exhilarating, and for a brief moment, you feel invincible. But truth be told, sailing the North Atlantic in the age of Vikings? Honestly, you probably won't survive this, so, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Also, drop your location and local time in the comments. It's always fascinating to see how wide our sleepy circle spreads. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The sky overhead is both map and mystery. You tilt your head back, squinting at constellations you barely recognize. Vikings didn't have GPS, shocking, right? Instead, their maps were etched in stars, traced in waves, carried by the wind, and whispered by seabirds. You might wonder how reliable a bird with a fish obsession really is, but those clever Norse sailors swore by them. Tonight, though, it isn't the birds that fascinate you most. Something deeper, literally, is stirring below your feet. Imagine standing there on weathered planks, ears pricked for something unusual. The gentle creak of ropes and murmurs of the crew blur into background noise. Then, without warning, a soft, eerie, low-frequency hum rises up through the hull, so gentle at first, you might mistake it for your stomach begging for snacks you absolutely didn't bring. But soon, the hum grows into an unmistakable melody, a distant chorus of creatures unimaginably huge and mysterious, drifting through the deep ocean beneath. Whale songs. In these waters, whales are the giants beneath your boat, gliding effortlessly through darkness. Yet, Vikings weren't merely awed by these enormous neighbors. To them, whale songs were secrets to unravel, mysterious melodies that hinted at routes to unknown lands. How precisely they discovered this skill, historians still argue, but more on that later. For now, simply savor that first whisper of possibility. The soft rhythm feels oddly reassuring. You breathe easier as the songs curl around the ship, echoing softly in its wooden ribs. Viking sailors, stoic as they appear, rely deeply on intuition. They trust their instincts and senses fiercely. Watching their expressions closely, you realize their calm exterior masks careful listening, eyes narrowing subtly with each rise and fall of the haunting whale calls. Stars above, whales below, navigation here is an act of pure trust, mixed generously with careful observation. You settle deeper into this voyage, getting accustomed to the rhythmic dips and lifts of the ship's bow. Waves slap gently against wood, splashing salty whispers over the railing, dampening your hands and sleeves. Far from bothersome, the constant spray is strangely comforting. As your eyes wander across the water, you start to notice things you've never paid attention to before, how subtle shifts in wave patterns hint at hidden reefs, or how certain constellations peak just above the horizon, guiding quietly, reliably. But it's those whale songs, thrumming ever so gently through the timbers beneath your boots, that really pull your attention. As if sensing your curiosity, an older sailor leans toward you, his beard tangled like seaweed, eyes crinkling into a knowing smile. He mutters quietly about how the whales seem to follow unseen paths beneath the waves, invisible trails that lead toward distant shores and hidden islands. Now, you're skeptical, surely navigation can't be that mystical. But there's something deeply convincing about his voice, calm and steady, blending seamlessly into the hum of wind and waves. Vikings don't exaggerate much, unless of course, they're talking about their last catch or conquest, then all bets are off. But here, the quiet sincerity in this sailor's tone rings true. Perhaps it's less mystical and more instinctive, a subtle, hard-earned skill cultivated over generations of silent listening. Looking around at the crew, each sailor absorbed in their own tasks yet somehow attuned to this shared mystery, you understand how vital subtlety is here. No flashing neon signs or cheerful robotic GPS voice telling you when to turn left, instead, you have a subtle choir of giants beneath your keel, murmuring secrets. This isn't a night for restless sleep or daydreams. Instead, you find yourself glued to the quiet interplay of senses, eyes scanning the heavens, ears soaking in distant whale harmonies, fingertips brushing rough ropes or smooth, salt-worn timber. It's almost meditative, a state of peaceful yet vigilant calm. If mindfulness apps existed back then, Vikings would have nailed it on their first try. So here you are, swept along by currents both literal and metaphorical, gently but persistently urged forward by whale songs humming from the shadowy depths. Whether these ocean giants truly guide you to land or merely serenade you into a gentle state of hopeful insomnia remains to be seen. For now, you just let their melodies wash over you, feeling strangely grateful for these enormous, unseen companions below. Soon, whispers drift across the deck, the night watch is about to begin. Your shift looms closer, promising hours beneath endless stars, ears trained on mysterious, watery symphonies. You steel yourself against the chill wind, pulling your woolen cloak tighter. The crew murmurs softly, quietly joking about the voyage ahead. But underlying their humor is the palpable seriousness of sailors who know that the ocean guards its secrets carefully. And speaking of secrets, did you know Vikings believed the northern lights were the glow of Valkyrie armor? Talk about high fashion in warfare. The whale songs hum softly again, pulling your thoughts back to the sea, gently reminding you that tonight is about listening, about trusting something beyond mere eyes and maps. For now, you remain exactly where you need to be, aboard a Viking longship, riding waves beneath stars, drawn steadily toward adventure. Whale songs reverberate softly through your body, and as you settle in, wrapped in layers of wool and wonder, you realize something important. Navigation isn't just knowing your destination. It's feeling the currents, trusting the unseen, and, tonight, believing in giants swimming below. Now the longship quietly cuts deeper into the velvet black night, carried along by the subtle rhythms of waves and wind. You've adjusted to the steady sway of the sea, your body relaxed yet vigilant. Each creak of timber or gentle slap of water against the hull feels familiar now, almost comforting. But just when you think you've mastered the ocean's rhythm, another whale song emerges from below, and your heart catches again in quiet awe. Tonight's melody is different. Deeper, slower, resonating through your chest like distant thunder. You sense immediately that something profound is unfolding beneath the waves. These whales aren't just singing aimlessly, they're communicating something vital. And the sailors, those grizzled, taciturn navigators, know it too. You see their eyes glimmer with quiet excitement, their movements growing subtly sharper as they adjust sails and ropes in response to the distant harmonies. Imagine it, your navigation system is essentially a pod of singing whales. Siri would definitely struggle with this one. But for these Viking sailors, whale songs aren't just mystical melodies, they are practical, life-or-death clues whispered by the ocean itself. As you listen, the song deepens further, vibrating the planks beneath your feet, making it impossible to ignore the enormity of the creatures that glide silently beneath you. Whales, you realize, are the true masters of the open ocean. Consider the humpback, capable of composing intricate songs that evolve over months and years. Or the blue whale, whose call can travel thousands of kilometers through dark waters. Viking sailors might not have known the precise biology behind these vocalizations. Let's face it, they weren't exactly marine biologists, but instinctively, they recognized that different songs meant different things. This realization becomes clearer as the night progresses. A particularly deep call seems to reverberate from the direction of land, its long, mournful notes suggesting proximity to shore. Vikings believed the whales' patterns of migration and song varied predictably. And indeed, modern science confirms whales often navigate along coastlines, singing to communicate across vast distances. Vikings didn't need textbooks to sense this, they felt it in their bones, tuned to ocean frequencies like human radios. As you lean against the mast, watching the crew work efficiently in the moonlight, another fascinating detail comes to mind. Did you know some whale songs can last up to 30 minutes without pause? Imagine having to sit through that at karaoke night. But out here, these elaborate melodies weren't entertainment, they were essential, practical tools, guiding sailors safely through fog and darkness. Now, historians still argue whether Vikings consciously interpreted whale calls as precise navigational directions or if it was mostly intuitive guesswork. It's the sort of question academics debate fiercely at conferences, with PowerPoints, coffee breaks, and more passive aggression than actual Viking battles. Either way, there's no doubt these seasoned sailors respected and utilized the mysterious sounds beneath their ships. Slowly, you're becoming more attuned yourself, beginning to distinguish subtle variations in the whale songs. One particular sound pattern emerges repeatedly, a short sequence of deep pulses followed by higher-pitched chirps. The old sailor with the seaweed beard whispers that this sequence reliably signals nearby land. Of course, if he's wrong, you might end up discovering Atlantis rather unintentionally, but that's a problem for another night. As the hours stretch on, your ears strain gently against the darkness, searching for further clues. The song grows clearer, louder, until it seems to rise from directly beneath the ship, resonating deep in your chest. You glance around, noticing a growing sense of excitement among the crew. They exchange quiet nods and murmurs, confidence filling their expressions. It's remarkable, really, navigation through instinct, through listening, through trust. Then, as if affirming the sailor's confidence, a flock of seabirds erupts into the night sky, startling you from your contemplation. Gulls and petrels swoop energetically, their cries mixing with whale songs in a vibrant marine chorus. Birds like these rarely stray far from land, their appearance now confirms what the whales hinted at earlier: land is close. The relief and anticipation aboard the ship ripple through the crew. You can almost taste it, the fresh water, wild berries, perhaps even game or shelter from endless waves. Yet, the whale song continues beneath, steady and calm, a reminder that their guidance is patient and enduring. For Vikings, sailing wasn't just about brute strength or courage, though they certainly had those in spades. It required subtle intelligence, acute observation, and a willingness to trust forces beyond their control. Whale songs offered a bridge between known and unknown, a lifeline in vast uncertainty. Of course, using whales for navigation isn't foolproof. Vikings learned this through countless journeys. Whales, after all, are living creatures with their own plans and priorities: feeding, mating, socializing. Sometimes, they'd suddenly veer off course, pursuing fish or fleeing predators, and you'd find yourself unexpectedly detoring toward Greenland instead of Iceland. Imagine explaining that one at the family reunion: yes, we accidentally sailed to Greenland because our whale GPS got distracted by a tasty herring shoal. Yet, even with these occasional mishaps, whale songs remained invaluable. They offered reassurance in the dark, provided a sense of direction in endless expanses, and perhaps most significantly, reminded sailors they weren't entirely alone on this unforgiving sea. As dawn approaches, the whale songs slowly begin to fade, sinking back into the depths from whence they came. The first pale hints of morning touch the horizon, painting soft pastels across the sky and water. The crew relaxes slightly, exhaustion creeping into their bones alongside quiet pride. They've survived another night, guided only by stars and singing giants. You glance once more into the dark waters beneath, gratitude swelling unexpectedly in your chest. Below, unseen whales glide gracefully away, their songs lingering faintly in memory. You've learned tonight that navigation isn't merely knowing where you're headed, it's also trusting in mysteries larger than yourself, relying on whispers from creatures you may never fully understand. So you settle back against the rail, savoring this final, tranquil moment before sunrise fully breaks, quietly grateful for whales and their strange, enchanting songs, deep-sea mysteries that guide you safely through the night, promising land ahead. Morning arrives gently, spreading soft pastel colors across the horizon like watercolor brushed carefully over damp paper. You squint, feeling the warmth of sunlight gently thaw the night's chill from your bones. Despite your weariness, there's something exhilarating about dawn at sea, especially after a night spent listening closely to whale songs, deciphering secrets that lay beneath waves. Today, the whales have drifted elsewhere, their deep melodies now merely echoes in your memory. The ocean around you feels vast and empty once more, its smooth surface broken only by tiny ripples and the occasional leap of an energetic fish. But aboard the ship, the sailors remain watchful, quietly scanning the horizon. They understand something crucial: silence at sea doesn't mean emptiness, it means something is changing, something subtle that requires attention. As the daylight sharpens, you reflect more deeply on the whale songs you've heard. The sailors believe these calls differ dramatically based on location, depth, and distance from land. This isn't just guesswork, modern marine biology backs this up. Whales produce different song types depending on their environment, each carrying distinct messages that their pod members recognize. To Viking sailors, attuned deeply to nature's subtleties, learning these differences was survival itself. This morning, though, an intriguing mystery emerges. Whales near open waters often sing longer, lower-frequency songs, possibly to communicate across vast distances, stretching beyond your imagination. But whales near coastlines produce shorter, higher-pitched calls, perhaps reflecting shallower waters and a need for precise communication. Vikings learned to distinguish these subtle variations intuitively, feeling the differences resonate beneath their feet like gentle vibrations from a distant drum. Now, scholars still fiercely debate just how deliberately Vikings relied on whales as guides. Some insist whale navigation was more poetic metaphor than practical method, though Vikings weren't exactly known for poetry contests, unless perhaps they involved beer. Others argue convincingly that whale songs were a practical cornerstone of Viking navigation, as important as star charts or reading the wind. Whatever the truth, there's no denying that whales and their mysterious voices captivated sailors enough to become embedded deeply in their maritime culture. While the longship slices calmly through the quiet sea, your thoughts drift into more fanciful corners. Whale song has always felt otherworldly, something deeply ancient, almost mythical. It isn't surprising, then, that Vikings developed legends around these gentle giants. Norse myths frequently depict whales as wise guardians of hidden places, guides leading deserving sailors to secret lands filled with abundance and safety. Imagine hearing these stories around a flickering fire, wrapped in woolen cloaks damp from sea mist, salt still crusted on your skin. Vikings told tales of magical whales, creatures capable of understanding humans or even shape-shifting to assist sailors in distress. A bit far-fetched? Perhaps. But consider this: even today, whales seem mysteriously drawn to humans in danger, sometimes protecting swimmers from predators or guiding ships safely through storms. Coincidence? Possibly. But it certainly lends weight to the Vikings' reverence for these ocean giants. Lost in thought, you hardly notice as seabirds circle again, their cries sharp and insistent, signaling proximity to land. Now, a different sort of alertness fills the sailors' eyes. The crew moves fluidly, preparing lines and tightening ropes, adjusting sails with practiced efficiency. The silent ocean whispers louder now, hints of coastline subtly seeping through its rippling patterns and shifting currents. One sailor, perhaps your bearded friend from last night, quietly mentions that whales often congregate near productive feeding grounds close to shorelines. Whales prefer shallow coastal waters teeming with fish, plankton, and squid, creating patterns sailors learn to read. Vikings, noticing these gatherings, followed whales as surely as you'd follow signs for free coffee. More than once, whales led their longships directly to undiscovered islands, hidden coves, or sheltered bays. And yet, as clearly as whales could signal land, mistakes still happened. Nature doesn't always follow neat human interpretations, after all. Misreading whale calls could lead ships dangerously astray. Vikings weren't foolish, they combined multiple clues. Stars, bird flight, wave patterns, and wind direction all mattered equally. But whale songs provided a kind of invisible layer of certainty, a reassuring hum beneath every voyage. You smile to yourself, imagining the frustration when whale directions went awry. Honestly, Olaf, you promised this whale knew the way home. Perhaps whales, too, occasionally sang off-key, or just felt mischievous. It's comforting to think even Vikings might have faced playful whale pranks. Now, the ship edges steadily closer to land, confirmed unmistakably by growing flocks of noisy gulls, the fresh scent of earth drifting faintly on the wind. Soon enough, the crew spies distant cliffs rising sharply from misty waters, rocky shores fringed with scraggly pines. Excitement ripples through the sailors, though it remains quietly controlled. Vikings rarely cheered prematurely, that was more for later, preferably around roaring fires with plenty of mead. You peer eagerly ahead, anticipation mixed with gratitude. The whales that guided your vessel through the dark night feel deeply connected to this moment, even though they've long vanished into the ocean's depths. It's oddly poignant, whales steering ships toward land they themselves rarely touched, bridging a gap between two utterly different worlds. As your ship draws ever nearer to shore, the ocean around you subtly shifts. Waves break gently on distant reefs, foam sparkling white in sunlight. Land emerges more clearly now, details sharpening, rugged cliffs streaked with gull nests, sheltered coves promising rest, dense forests hinting adventure. Standing at the bow, you feel this powerful sense of completion. The ocean feels friendlier now, no longer the mysterious void of last night. Your journey, guided partly by stars, partly by instinct, but significantly by whale songs, feels both satisfying and strangely humbling. You understand something important here: navigation isn't simply steering from point A to point B. It's about trusting subtle signs, learning to interpret what nature gently offers, and occasionally accepting you'll get spectacularly lost along the way. And that's okay. After all, Vikings didn't just set out to discover land, they sought adventure, knowledge, the quiet thrill of trusting giants beneath waves, and occasionally, a very confused whale leading them astray. Your ship slips neatly into calmer waters, gently approaching shore as seabirds circle overhead. A feeling of quiet triumph fills your chest. You've learned to listen to ocean whispers, trust whale songs, and believe deeply in the subtle guidance of giants. Now, welcome to land, courtesy of the whales, the stars, and a little bit of Viking courage. Stepping ashore after days at sea is a sensation you can't easily forget. Your legs wobble slightly, still swaying to the rhythms of waves no longer beneath your feet. Soft sand shifts under your boots, cool and gritty, reminding you that solid land, while comforting, isn't as static as it seems. As you glance back at the longship gently rocking in shallow waters, you realize how profoundly dependent the Viking sailors were on invisible pathways traced by giants below. Settling onto the beach, you observe the sailors carefully securing their vessel, gently coaxing it above the tidal. It's tempting to think their journey is complete, that their reliance on whales ends here. But the truth is more nuanced. These sailors didn't merely follow whales blindly, no pun intended, they learned to anticipate whale migration patterns, harnessing this knowledge like modern-day navigators with satellite data and radar. Only instead of blinking screens, they had deep whale songs echoing softly in memory. You sit on a piece of driftwood bleached pale by salt and sun, absorbing the view. Rocky cliffs frame the quiet cove you've landed in, topped by thick forests whispering secrets in the breeze. Birds chatter noisily overhead, perhaps slightly miffed at your arrival. Vikings typically weren't renowned bird enthusiasts, unless those birds indicated fish-rich waters, or imminent land. Curiously, whales and birds often signaled similar information, creating a fascinating interplay between sky and sea navigation. Whales guided sailors toward productive feeding grounds, while seabirds confirmed proximity to coasts, harbors, or islands. Vikings didn't rely on any single method exclusively. Instead, they cleverly combined whale calls with subtle cues from waves, currents, winds, and yes, even the occasional disgruntled gull. Now comfortably ashore, your mind drifts toward a curious question: how exactly did Vikings decode whale migrations? After all, whales aren't exactly predictable like clockwork, they're not trains or buses. Instead, their patterns subtly shifted according to ocean temperature, food availability, breeding cycles, and the mysterious whims of ocean life. To follow whales successfully, sailors had to develop patience, observation, and remarkable intuition. Historians still debate fiercely whether Vikings consciously tracked whale migrations or simply learned through experience where whales gathered at different times. Imagine heated scholarly debates, lots of tweed jackets and elaborate PowerPoint slides featuring skeptical whale faces. Yet even skeptics acknowledge the practical wisdom embedded in Viking tales. Stories recount sailors patiently observing whales through multiple seasons, carefully noting patterns of departure and arrival. It's easy to underestimate how subtle yet reliable these whale migration routes were. For instance, humpback whales are known today for predictably returning to the same feeding and breeding grounds year after year. Vikings noticed similar patterns, albeit without fancy GPS tracking collars or underwater microphones. Their observations became oral traditions, carefully passed down through generations. Settling deeper into the driftwood, you picture Viking elders sharing stories by firelight, recounting whale sightings and songs to younger sailors. These gatherings weren't just storytelling, they were strategic briefings disguised as entertainment. Vikings cleverly wrapped navigation lessons inside myths and legends, ensuring vital survival knowledge remained engaging enough to remember vividly. Speaking of quirky legends, did you know Vikings believed that whales sometimes protected sailors from sea monsters? The idea of massive whales heroically battling krakens might sound absurdly cinematic today, but Vikings earnestly told such tales. To them, whales were more than guides, they were allies, guardians, creatures to trust deeply and respect profoundly. These myths weren't merely fanciful, they reinforced the deep sense of partnership between sailors and whales. Vikings saw themselves not as conquerors of the sea, but as humble participants in an ancient natural dance, one where understanding and cooperation mattered far more than dominance or brute strength. After all, attempting to bully a 50-ton whale probably wouldn't end well, even if your axe skills were legendary. You watch the crew efficiently setting up a temporary camp, their movements confident yet understated. Fires crackle softly, pots begin to simmer, and the scent of food soon mixes tantalizingly with salt air. Around you, conversations buzz gently, interspersed occasionally with laughter or an affectionate insult, classic Viking camaraderie. But even here, ashore, their thoughts subtly return to whales. Over fires and meals, the sailors quietly discuss migration patterns they've observed, theorizing what this might mean for future journeys. Could the whales be signaling new lands even farther west, places yet undiscovered? The excitement hidden beneath their casual tones is infectious. This deep connection Vikings developed with whales wasn't just practical, it shaped their entire maritime culture. It influenced their rituals, stories, art, and even burial customs. Archaeologists have uncovered Viking carvings depicting whales intertwined with sailing ships, symbolic reminders of whales' critical role as navigational allies. One particularly fascinating detail emerges as you listen in. Vikings observed that whales frequently moved toward abundant fish populations, which were themselves driven by underwater currents and nutrient-rich waters. This meant whale songs indirectly revealed vast underwater landscapes, canyons, plateaus, or seamounts, features sailors couldn't possibly see but needed desperately to avoid or seek out. It's genuinely remarkable. Whale songs didn't just guide Vikings toward land, they offered invisible nautical charts, acoustic maps of underwater terrain. Whales effectively became living sonar devices, their calls bouncing subtly against hidden depths, revealing secrets of ocean geography. It's as if Vikings had stumbled onto early marine acoustics centuries before submarines or scientific exploration made it official. You stand, stretching stiff muscles, absorbing the quiet realization of just how sophisticated Viking navigation truly was. They didn't simply guess at whale behavior or follow random songs, they intentionally harnessed whale knowledge with impressive precision, turning deep-sea mysteries into reliable sailing strategies. As evening descends gently, fires glow brighter, and stars slowly emerge overhead. The ocean whispers softly against the shore, its rhythm comforting. You glance toward the open sea, quietly grateful for whales, their enormous bodies gracefully gliding somewhere beneath distant waves, continuing their endless migrations. You realize these creatures, with their mysterious calls, connected lands separated by thousands of miles, subtly shaping human history in ways they themselves likely never knew. Tonight, settled comfortably ashore, warmed by flickering fires and the soft laughter of companions, you feel profound gratitude toward whales, giant singers whose songs provided invisible trails, guiding Vikings safely through darkness, uncertainty, and the vast unknown. And tomorrow? You'll listen again, ready to follow those ancient whispers across the sea. Dawn creeps in again, this time through a mist that curls around the Viking camp like a cat brushing against your ankles. The smell of smoldering fires mixes with the earthy scent of wet pine and kelp, while distant waves continue their tireless applause. You wake slowly, stretching beneath a woolen cloak that's still a bit damp from the night air. Around you, the camp stirs. Men yawn, crack joints, sharpen blades, not because battle is near, but because Vikings never miss a chance to look slightly intimidating. But what you're really waiting for isn't human, it's a sound. Low, haunting, oddly melodic. And there it is. Faint at first, like memory surfacing from a dream, a deep note carries across the water. Then another. The song seems to shimmer through the mist, threading its way into your bones. You smile. The whales are back. You follow the sound to the beach, where others stand already, gazing out toward the gray water. No whales in sight yet, but they're close. Their voices, rising and falling in long, otherworldly waves, are unmistakable. Today, the crew speaks of legends. Stories passed down from their grandfathers and their grandfathers before them. Whales, they say, are not merely beasts. They are beings sent from the gods, Odin's scouts, perhaps, or Njord's messengers. One tale describes a whale road beneath the ocean's surface, a mystical highway only the whales can sense, leading to untouched lands and forgotten riches. The Vikings believed that by following these creatures, they could uncover the earth's hidden corners. And sometimes, they were right. You listen closely as the stories unfold. One saga tells of a fleet lost in fog, saved by a single whale whose mournful song cut through the white veil, guiding them to a safe fjord. Another claims a dying warrior was granted a vision of whales circling an island shaped like a hammer, Thor's blessing, they said. Whether symbolic or literal, these stories weren't just for fireside entertainment. They were coded maps, metaphors built on observation, repetition, and, let's admit it, just a bit of wishful thinking. Of course, not everyone bought into the idea of mystical whale roadways. Even among Vikings, there were skeptics, grizzled types who preferred good old-fashioned sunstones and star charts. Still, when the sea stretches endlessly in all directions, you'll take guidance from wherever it comes. And that's the heart of it, really. Viking navigation wasn't about clinging to one system. It was about adapting, layering information, cross-checking clues. If the whales sang in a direction that matched the tilt of the sun and the pull of the wind, well, you'd follow. But if their song conflicted with the gull's flight or the star's story, maybe you'd hesitate. The ocean demands humility, and Vikings had plenty, just hidden under layers of bravado and braided beards. As the mist lifts slightly, something shifts. A faint ripple cuts across the water. Then another. Soon, the silhouette of a whale breaches the haze, a broad, barnacle-speckled back arching elegantly before slipping back under. Then a second follows, and a third. They move in a loose formation, curving northward, as if tracing some secret corridor beneath the waves. The sailors tense, not out of fear, but attention. One gestures slightly. They're heading toward the ice tongues, he murmurs. They always swing that way before turning west. This isn't random. This is data. Over time, the crew has mapped out the whale's habits. This pod always dips east first, then loops toward richer waters. They seem to know where the sea is thick with fish, where warm and cold currents meet like long-lost friends. And wherever whales feed, the Vikings find opportunity, food, shelter, and sometimes, new land. Now here's the fun part. Modern oceanographers have confirmed that whales absolutely travel along consistent migratory routes. Blue whales, humpbacks, even orcas, they tend to follow reliable paths between breeding and feeding grounds. Some of these paths trace coastlines so precisely that scientists today use whales to identify underwater topography. The idea that Vikings noticed this without sonar or satellite. It's not just possible, it's likely. But historians still argue whether these ancient sailors understood whale migration as scientifically as we might hope. Some claim it was all luck and superstition, dressed up as strategy. Others believe the Vikings were early acoustic navigators, attuned to frequencies and rhythms we've mostly forgotten. Honestly, the truth probably lies somewhere in between, intuition honed by necessity, reinforced by experience, and passed down through the stories we now call myths. And speaking of myths, did you know the Norse believed whales could live for hundreds of years? One tale describes a whale island, so massive it tricked sailors into landing on its back, only for it to sink beneath the waves when disturbed. The creature, they claimed, was a guardian of lost knowledge, slumbering beneath the sea like an aquatic librarian who hates being poked. Back on the beach, the pod continues its slow passage. The sailors don't shout or cheer. They simply watch, noting subtle shifts in the water, the angle of the whale's arcs, the tempo of their songs. These observations, barely discussed aloud, will guide the next phase of the journey. Maybe they'll follow the whales. Maybe they'll wait for the next group. Either way, the decision will come not from bravado, but from quiet, deliberate listening. You step away from the others, walking a little farther down the shoreline. The waves hiss gently at your feet, whispering something ancient. The whale's song reaches you again, lower now, fading, but still pulsing faintly through the air, like a forgotten lullaby. You close your eyes, imagining their vast shapes gliding beneath the waves, etching invisible trails into the ocean's memory. The Vikings might have told you they were chasing fortune, fame, or farmland. But deep down, they were chasing understanding. Listening to the sea, deciphering its code, daring to believe that something so vast could be made legible, not with maps, but with music. And as you open your eyes again, watching those gentle giants fade into the morning light, you feel something shift in you too. A quiet confidence. A trust in patterns. A readiness to keep going, even when all you have to guide you is a song in the dark. The ship is at sea again. The wind has shifted, tugging insistently at your cloak, and the salt in the air tastes sharper now, as if the ocean's flavor deepens the farther you go. You brace yourself at the rail, watching waves roll like slow-breathing animals beneath your feet. Somewhere below, the whales are moving again. And once more, the sailors are listening. It's night now, and the sky is a vault of scattered stars. No moon tonight, only the dim glimmer of starlight bouncing across dark water. You're on night watch, perched near the mast with a woolen hood pulled low, ears straining for familiar sounds. Most of the crew sleeps below, swaying in the rhythm of the waves, but a few others sit nearby, silent, alert. Then, without fanfare, it begins. A low, undulating hum crawls up through the deck boards. You feel it before you hear it, an eerie vibration that pulses in your spine. It's the whales again. You glance sideways at the sailor next to you. He's still, eyes half closed, as if trying to remember a half-forgotten tune. That's how this works now. You don't talk about the songs. You feel them. You interpret them. You act. The melody tonight is different from the ones you heard before. This time, the rhythm is more clipped, more restless. Higher notes weave in and out, echoing across the hull like ghostly birdsong underwater. One sailor mutters, "They're navigating ice." And somehow, you know he's right. The song isn't about arrival. It's about maneuvering, danger close, sharp turns, the dance of survival. This is what night watch is all about. You don't just sit and stare into the darkness. You listen. To the wind, to the creak of ropes, to the thousand murmurs of the ship. And to the whales. Night sailing demands attention to things most people overlook, the way the stars shift in their positions minute by minute, the taste of moisture in the wind, the way a cold current brushes against the hull like a warning. Vikings learned to make sense of all this, the ocean's own language. And the whales were one more part of that vast, complex conversation. You remember something you were told days ago, around the campfire, that different pods of whales produce different dialects. Just like humans. One pod's song might sound totally alien to another. This blew your mind at the time, and even now, as the ship cuts silently across a dark ocean guided by invisible giants, the thought sticks with you. It's like tuning into a local radio station underwater, each group of whales broadcasting their own messages, their own culture. Scientists today agree, whales from different regions do have distinct languages. Humpbacks off Iceland sing different patterns than those near Greenland. Orcas, notoriously clever, even teach their dialects generationally, like underwater grammar lessons passed from grandmother to calf. So if you're a Viking, and you've spent years hearing the songs of one group, you'd notice immediately when you sail into another's range. And that's exactly what's happening tonight. The older sailor next to you whispers, "These aren't our whales." You blink, confused. He points to the rail. "These songs come from southern water pods. We've drifted too far. Current pulled us." You hadn't even noticed. The sky looked the same. The stars still turned. But the whales, they knew. Their different harmonies exposed your ship's subtle drift. And now, you've got to correct it. Not with panic. Not with yelling. But with careful adjustments, rebalancing the sails, shifting weight, waiting for the current to turn in your favor. This is where Viking seamanship truly shines, not in brute force, but in constant responsiveness. You learn to react, gently and intuitively, to the world around you. And in the quiet of night, surrounded by dark waves and ghostly songs, every choice feels monumental. But even the best sailors can make mistakes. Tonight, a sharp jolt rocks the ship, a sudden gust catches the sail wrong, throwing the hull off balance. You scramble with the others, tightening lines, adjusting course. For a moment, chaos. The peaceful hum of the whale seems to vanish, drowned out by wind and flapping canvas. Then silence. Not silence like peace, but silence like the moment after a shout, tense, unfinished. You wait. Breathe. The ship steadies. And then, faintly, the song returns. But it's a different tune. Slow, steady, reassuring. Almost like a lullaby. The pod beneath you, whichever group it is, seems to recognize your course correction. Their song shifts, coaxing you gently westward, back toward the route you meant to follow. Historians still argue whether Vikings truly used whale songs as dynamic navigational feedback, or if these were just stories built over time. Were they really responding to the songs? Or simply layering interpretations onto coincidences? It's a tough question. Hard to prove something so ephemeral. But when you're here, on a silent sea, stars wheeling overhead, and the gentle voice of a 30-ton creature humming through your ribs, it doesn't feel like coincidence. It feels like conversation. Back on deck, the mood softens. The crew settles again, quiet, thoughtful. Someone pulls out a piece of dried fish. Another chuckles about a girl he left behind, or maybe a goat. The whale song fills the spaces between words, a strange kind of companionship in the night. You realize then that these long journeys weren't just about discovering new lands, they were about learning to live with uncertainty. Vikings didn't always know where they'd end up. But they trusted their tools, the stars, the winds, the birds, and yes, the whales. Listening became a skill, a virtue, a necessity. And even when the songs were strange, alien, from another pod, they still offered clues, provided you listened hard enough. Sometimes, the unfamiliar voice is the one you need most. You lean back against the mast, watching the stars tilt gently above. Somewhere below, a massive creature slides through the water, singing its heart out in a language no human will ever fully understand. But you're listening. And somehow, that's enough. The sky begins to pale once again, that thin line of dusty blue slicing across the east like a promise. You've made it through another night, and if you're being honest, this one felt longer. Not because of storms or sea monsters, though let's not rule those out, but because of what you felt under your feet, the unmistakable sense that something big was coming. And it does. Just past dawn, after the whales have faded into silence again, someone shouts from the bow. Not the usual, bird sighting, or fish school, shout, this one has urgency. Excitement. You scramble forward, eyes blinking against morning light, and there it is. Land. A thin, rugged sliver on the horizon, low and gray but unmistakably real. Cheers ripple across the ship, not wild celebration, but something quieter. Deeper. Relief, maybe. Gratitude. The kind of feeling you get when a gamble pays off, but you're too exhausted to do more than nod at the sky and whisper, thank you. This is the moment Viking crews live for, landfall after days, or weeks, of reading the signs. And not just any signs. The stars, sure. The wind, obviously. But the whales? Oh, the whales did their part. Their songs told you where the deep water ran, where the warm currents curved, and, most importantly, where food clustered close to shore. Because here's the thing, whales don't just sing. They move. And when they move in certain patterns, it tells a story. A U-shaped arc in the open sea. That's a feeding loop. A straight line north. Probably migration. A scattered, overlapping mess of directionless dives. Either confusion, or a rich fishing ground. Vikings who spent decades on the sea came to read these patterns as naturally as you read body language. And this time, the patterns were perfect. The sailor at the tiller, face tanned, wind cracked, and half hidden by an impressive eyebrow forest, grins without looking at you. Told you, he mutters. They were leading us. You don't bother arguing. You want to, a little, some stubborn part of you wants to chalk it up to luck or good sailing instincts. But deep down, you know the truth, those great, humming giants beneath the ship knew something. And they showed you. As the coastline draws nearer, the details come into focus. Jagged cliffs. Patches of forest clinging to rocky hills. Narrow beaches washed clean by steady surf. You see no villages, no fire smoke, no carved stones, just wildness. Newness. A place few feet have touched, save perhaps seabirds and the occasional wandering bear. The crew's already shifting gears, preparing for landfall like a well-oiled machine. Axes are checked. Food supplies are counted. Scout gear is handed out. This isn't just curiosity, it's calculated expansion. A chance to claim, to settle, to survive. You, though, you're still thinking about the whales. Because even now, you hear it. Faint, almost imperceptible, but there, a low, rolling note echoing against the cliffs. Not from beneath the ship this time, but from the deeper water offshore. The whales didn't vanish. They stayed close. Watching. Singing. Historians still debate whether these landfalls were really planned. Some argue that Viking expeditions westward, toward places like Iceland, Greenland, even Vinland, were the result of pure accident. Storms, bad luck, desperate need. But others point to consistency. Certain records suggest that Vikings returned to these lands repeatedly, even seasonally. That implies knowledge. Pattern recognition. A system. And what system did they trust, out here, when stars were clouded and birds flew too high? The answer lies beneath the keel, humming in frequencies you can't fully translate, but you feel in your teeth and bones. Whale songs weren't just passive background noise, they were dynamic, evolving, region-specific guidance. Some scholars now believe certain pods may have altered their singing patterns depending on underwater topography. Which means, get this, the whales may have literally sung differently near land. If that's true, then Viking sailors weren't just lucky. They were listening to real-time updates from the original marine cartographers. Still think that's far-fetched? Consider this, modern sonar experts use hydrophones to detect similar changes in whale acoustics near underwater ridges and shelves. If scientists can do it today with fancy gear, who's to say Viking ears, trained by thousands of miles at sea, didn't do the same? It also explains why some Viking legends describe songs in the water that changed when land was near. Not always poetic, sometimes chilling. One tale speaks of a sailor who heard a whale's song abruptly stop, followed by silence so deep it cracked the sky. He swore it meant land nearby, and he was right. You step ashore, boots sinking slightly into the wet sand. The air smells different here, wilder, crisper, tinged with something floral. Inland, the land rises into green-brown slopes threaded with narrow creeks. This is untouched territory. And while the crew fans out, setting up camp or exploring cautiously, your gaze is drawn back to the water. A flash. There, just offshore, a dark back rolls lazily over the waves, followed by a tail that disappears without splash. A final farewell. The whales have done their job. You're here. For now. Because if history tells us anything, it's that Vikings never stayed still for long. Land was a pause, not a destination. And the whales? They kept singing, somewhere out there, new songs for new lands, if you were bold enough to follow. You take one last look at the water, then turn inland, the song still echoing in your chest like a compass needle pointing outward. The ocean will call again. And when it does, you'll know exactly how to answer. You don't leave the coastline behind completely. Not yet. The Vikings might have planted their boots on firm soil, but their eyes, and their ears, stay turned toward the sea. You quickly learn that landfall isn't the end of the journey. It's just the start of another kind, understanding the place, testing the resources, and more importantly, figuring out how to get back. Because for a Viking, the true mark of mastery isn't just finding a new world, it's finding your way home again. And to do that, you need maps. Not ink on parchment maps, those would come centuries later. No, these maps are sung, remembered, and passed down. You learn that each coastline has its own signature when it comes to whale song. Like a fingerprint. A place-based melody. And the Vikings? They listened and started stitching those songs into memory. You're sitting near the campfire one night, chewing dried fish that might have been delicious in a past life, when an older sailor begins to hum. Not a drinking song. Not a lullaby. A slow, rhythmic chant, deep in the chest, barely melodic. You glance around, but no one stops him. In fact, some join in, adding small variations, low tones, layered pulses. It's not for entertainment. It's a memory exercise. They're recalling whale songs. Each chant is a kind of audio sketch of what they heard at sea, certain pitches or intervals mimicking what the whales sang in specific locations. One sailor explains it like this one. That's the coast before the cliffs. The whales dipped low there. Deep hums. Always 3. He taps out a beat. But near the fjord, they sang higher. Fast, like birds underwater. And just like that, you begin to understand how Vikings built mental maps out of song. You'd think it would get confusing, trying to remember all these notes, all these whale voices, but that's where the oral tradition came in. Everything important was turned into song, rhythm, rhyme. It was the Norse version of Google Drive. Historians today debate just how systematic this practice was. Did Viking navigators really create consistent sonic charts, or was it a loose, informal tradition passed down between crews? Some evidence suggests actual structured chants were preserved, embedded in sagas that have since been partially lost or misinterpreted. Others argue that while the mapping may have been less literal, it was still real, a method of orientation based on repeated soundscapes associated with geography. Think of it like this: you hear a certain bird song and you know you're near the forest. You hear traffic and you know you're close to the city. The Vikings simply applied that same logic to whales. If a certain pattern of long-pitched moans echoed beneath the hull, they knew they were near, say, the southern curve of Iceland. Or approaching a particular strait in Greenland. And it wasn't just whales. Sometimes other creatures joined the orchestra. Seals, dolphins, the high-pitched whistles of orcas, all played into the broader marine symphony. But whales? Whales were the bassline. Always dependable. Always present. As days pass, you notice how the sailors talk less about distance and more about sound. Feels like we're leaving the low water hum, one mutters during your first scouting voyage after landing. Another adds, haven't heard the paired calls since we passed that reef, must have crossed the ridge. They speak in music. It's weirdly poetic. Like they're tuning themselves to the sea, letting the rhythms of nature become instruments of navigation. And in a way, they are. Because every new chant, every remembered song, becomes a kind of nautical chart, etched not in ink but in muscle memory, gut feeling, and group rhythm. You realize how powerful this is when the crew sets out again on a test voyage. Just a quick sail down the coast and back. No landmarks. Just water. And yet, they don't panic. They don't even squint at the horizon for hours on end. Instead, they listen. And when one of the younger sailors frowns, murmuring, "That's not the same song from earlier," they change course. Just like that. No drama. No argument. The sound's changed, which means the location has. It's like having sonar, except your sonar is 30 tons and sings like a haunted cello. Of course, not every chant is accurate. Sometimes memory fails. Sometimes the whales are off their usual routes. One time, the crew misreads the rhythm and nearly ends up in a rocky inlet. The captain mutters about show-off whales trying to remix their own songs. Everyone laughs, but they steer clear of the cove just in case. Which brings you to something unexpected: humor. You'd think that navigating by whale song would be solemn business. And it is, sometimes. But often, it's playful. Whales, after all, aren't solemn. They breach for fun. They slap their tails just to hear the splash. They mimic other creatures just because they can. Vikings noticed this, and over time, they stopped seeing the songs as rigid codes and started understanding them as moods. Some songs meant, "Follow me." Others meant, "Stay away." And a few were just whales being weird. One chant they jokingly call, the drunk dolphin loop, because it goes nowhere and usually ends in circles. Modern researchers studying whale culture agree, some whales do, in fact, sing variations that seem to have no practical function, at least not obviously. They're just experimenting. Jamming, in a way. This delighted the Vikings, who respected mischief. If a whale wanted to throw in a few flourishes, well, it probably earned that right. And this attitude, the blend of precision and playfulness, is what made Viking whale-based navigation sustainable. It wasn't rigid. It was flexible. Organic. Adaptable. You didn't memorize a song, you understood it. You felt the tone, the tempo, the texture. And that told you everything you needed. So here you are, days after landfall, sailing a quiet stretch of water with no visible landmarks. But you're not lost. Not even close. You close your eyes, letting the songs filter through the hull, through your skin. You feel the deep, slow pulse of a familiar call. You whisper to no one in particular. "They're guiding us again." And you believe it. The weather turns, as it always does when you're feeling a little too confident. One moment the sea is glassy, the air calm, and the songs of whales hum faintly through the hull like background music in a sleepy tavern. The next, the wind rises from nowhere, slicing across the water like a blade. Waves begin to lift and curl, and the sky collapses into a lid of low, gray clouds. And just like that, everything gets serious. You're back aboard the longship, and the crew is in motion. No panic, just fast hands, steady movements. Sail furled. Line secured. Oars out. You take your place at the side, gripping hard as the ship begins to heave and buck under the growing force of the waves. Somewhere in the distance, lightning touches the sea like a warning finger. Welcome to real Viking sailing. It's during these moments, when visibility is poor, stars are obscured, and even the coastline feels like a dream, that you realize how risky it is to rely too much on any one method. Whale song included. Tonight, you hear them again, but it's distorted. The vibrations that once felt smooth and clear now bounce strangely under the hull, fractured by churning water and thunder. The ship groans as it crests a massive wave, then slaps down hard. You cling tighter. One sailor yells, "We're too far east. That's not our pod." Another replies, "Can't be, those calls are too fast." Juveniles. That's the thing, if you're relying on sound to guide you, misinterpreting it can be just as dangerous as silence. Juvenile whales sing differently. Some even mimic the older pods, but with errors. Think of it like trying to follow a GPS that's just now learning what a road is. It's easy to get turned around. Vikings learned this the hard way. You don't need a historian to tell you that. Tonight, you feel it in your gut. The ship creaks hard to starboard, and the crew rows with everything they've got. But the visibility is terrible. The wind howls. You can't see the stars. And you can't clearly hear the whales anymore. This is what makes the ocean such a brutal equalizer. One moment you're following gentle giants to paradise. The next, you're navigating chaos, listening to scrambled voices in a storm. And in that confusion, one wrong interpretation could mean slamming into a reef, spinning into a whirlpool, or just drifting, slowly, hopelessly, off course until the cold claims you. Historians argue about this point too. Some claim Viking reliance on whale song was overstated. That in dangerous moments, it offered little. Others believe the opposite, that even in storms, experienced sailors could use the bassline of those songs to orient themselves. That, like a familiar voice through static, the melody could be picked out if you were calm enough. You try it now. Close your eyes. Breathe. Focus past the roaring wind, the crash of waves, the shouts of the crew. And you hear something. Faint. Barely there. A steady pulse, deep and long. Not fast like the juveniles. Not scattered like the confused pods. This one is centered. Your eyes snap open. Portside, you yell without thinking. That's the track. Follow it. The captain doesn't question you. He tilts the tiller hard. The oars on the port side pull harder. The ship groans, but you turn. And 5 minutes later, the wind eases. Not gone, not yet, but softer. The waves settle slightly. You see an opening in the clouds. And beneath the ship, the whales sing again, clear, steady, guiding. Everyone breathes. You slump back against a barrel, drenched, trembling. That could have gone very badly. But this is the reality of whale-based navigation. It's not foolproof. It's not a magic spell. It's a living system, as messy and unpredictable as the ocean itself. Sometimes, the whales mislead you. Sometimes you mishear them. Sometimes the ocean just decides to mess with you because it can. And that's why Vikings layered their methods. They didn't abandon stars or waves or seabirds. Whale songs weren't the only truth, they were one of many truths. A whisper from below that, combined with signs from above and around, gave a fuller picture. Use it right, and you found your way. Use it wrong, or use it alone, and you could vanish. You learn that some Viking crews even had specialized listeners. 1 or 2 sailors per ship who trained themselves not just to hear the whales, but to interpret them. They practiced at sea, memorizing pitches, rhythms, echo patterns. These whale whisperers, as later tales called them, were rare and valued. Some were believed to dream in whale song, their minds half-tuned to the deep. And yes, historians still argue whether these figures were real or myth. Some sagas mention them clearly. Others don't. But when you see the way certain sailors pause, tilt their heads, and react to sounds you barely notice, you start to wonder. You start to believe. As the storm fades, the crew begins to relax. A sailor makes a joke about how the whales must have been arguing mid-song. Another offers a soggy strip of dried meat as thanks. The laughter is tired but real. You survived a test, and so did the whales. That night, the stars finally break through. One by one, constellations appear, dancing high above. You lie on the deck, wrapped in your cloak, eyes on the sky. And below you, a slow, familiar rumble vibrates upward. The whales are back. They never left, really. Just waited out the storm, the way you did. And now, their voices are as clear as before. Different song. Different message. This one says, "You're back on the path. Keep going." So you will. By now, the connection feels normal. Expected. Even comforting. You've grown so used to the deep, resonant voices beneath the hull that sailing without them would feel like riding a horse with no reins, or worse, with no hooves. The whales are part of the crew now, in a way. Not seen, never touched, but felt. Trusted. As the ship coasts into calmer waters, the sailors begin to speak more openly, not just about the whales themselves, but how those songs have become woven into the very soul of their culture. It's not all about utility anymore. The whale song isn't just a tool. It's a symbol. A totem. A secret. Back on land, when they return, if they return, the stories will spread. But not every Viking hears the full truth. The whispers of whale song navigation, the chants passed between longship crews, the nuanced interpretations of deep versus shallow call patterns. That knowledge stays aboard. Within the brotherhood of sailors. Like a rune scratched beneath a shield, visible only if you know where to look. You see it in the rituals too. At dusk, a crew member carves a small shape into the side of the mast. It's not a dragon or an axe, but something more abstract. Waves curling into a spiral. The suggestion of an eye. A line of dots echoing outward. It's for the whale, he tells you plainly. So they know we're still listening. You nod, not entirely sure if he's joking. But you suspect he's not. All around the ship, you begin noticing similar patterns. Carvings in or handles. Marks at the base of the mast. A curved bone charm hanging from a belt, etched with crude waveforms. These aren't random decorations. They're symbolic references to the songs that guided them. And to the creatures who sang. Historians have puzzled for years over certain Norse artifacts. Whale bones inscribed with symbols that don't match known runes. Decorative knots in cloaks that resemble acoustic waveforms more than ornament. Could these be leftovers of the whale song legacy? Cultural echoes that survived long after the specific knowledge faded? It's hard to say. Scholars still argue whether these interpretations are legitimate or just modern projections. One theory suggests that what we now call artifacts might have been mnemonic devices, ways of preserving audio knowledge in a visual format. It would make sense. Vikings didn't write logs or compose sheet music. But they remembered. And they sang. Which brings us back to the chants. They're everywhere now. At every turn of the sail, every change in weather, every shift of the tide, someone hums or whistles or mumbles a familiar melody. Not for entertainment. Not even as habit. But to test the sea. to see what the whales echo back. And the craziest part? Sometimes, the ocean seems to respond. Like yesterday, when the chant shifted to mimic a three-tone rise, high, higher, then a deep roll, and minutes later, the pod answered. You could hear it, clear as anything, coming from below. Not a match, but a reply. A soft answer. An echo. A nod. You've entered a world where communication isn't about language, but resonance. Where humans and whales pass meaning like breath through a conch shell, subtle, slow, sacred. One sailor tells you of a place farther west, beyond the known maps. An island that only appears when the whales lead you there. They sing it up from the deep, he says, tapping his temple. They draw it out like a memory. He's not the only one. You start to notice a pattern in these stories, a place that can't be found unless the whales agree. A hidden land, a sacred bay, an isle of green warmth and freshwater springs. Some say it's real. Others call it a metaphor. You're not sure where you land on that spectrum, but you admit, you're listening harder now. Because it's not just old tales. The songs themselves are changing. Slowly, subtly, the whales have begun to sing new patterns. Not entirely unfamiliar, but shifted. One note drawn longer. Another dropped. The intervals are widening, like a curtain parting. The old man with the carved belt listens carefully. They're showing us a new way, he murmurs. Not home. Not yet. But something else. You wonder what that means. A new current. A new coastline. A danger ahead. Whatever it is, the crew adjusts accordingly. It's not a decision, not really. No one votes. No one argues. The ship just turns. Slightly. With intent. And you realize something that sends a chill up your spine, not of fear, but awe. This crew has surrendered control. Not in a reckless way. Not out of laziness or blind faith. But in a kind of ancient trust. They believe the whales know. That they've been following these routes far longer than humans have ever drawn breath. That their songs are maps, layered, living, evolving maps sung in water, refined by millennia of deep-sea memory. It's humbling. And it makes you think about how much human culture emerged from this very dynamic, watching animals, listening to nature, copying what worked. We like to imagine ourselves as the top of the hierarchy. But maybe, long ago, we were students. Apprentices to the sea. You remember a tale from a saga, an odd one. A Viking warrior who could hear whales from shore. He was laughed at until he correctly predicted a storm from their sudden silence. The saga called him seerborn, spirit-touched. But maybe he was just tuned in. Maybe his blood carried a little extra salt water. Back aboard the ship, another carving goes into the tiller post. 3 lines, curved like a sound wave. The chant resumes. And far below, the whales sing back. A conversation older than any king. A story written in movement, in pitch, in water. A map, sung in the dark. The ocean's calm deceives you today. It lies flat and glassy, reflecting the sun like a polished blade. There's no wind to fill the sail, so the oars are out, dipping rhythmically into the water like the arms of some great wooden centipede. You're rowing too, sore-shouldered but content, letting your mind wander between the steady splashes and the dull creak of the hull. That's when the argument begins. 2 sailors behind you are talking, quietly at first, but with that edge in their voices that says this isn't casual banter. One claims the whales have been leading the crew west this whole time. The other scoffs, says they've misread the pattern. The pitch is rising too fast, he argues. It means we're looping. They're circling us. The captain says nothing yet. But you feel the tension rise like fog off warm water. And just like that, the charm breaks. Here, in the silence between strokes and songs, you realize something important. Even among those who trust the whales deeply, interpretation is messy. It always has been. You're not surprised to learn that historians today still argue about this same thing. One camp believes the Vikings used whale song consciously, tactically. They listened, interpreted patterns, and followed with purpose. Another school claims it was subconscious, intuitive. That the Vikings didn't follow whales so much as they noticed their presence coinciding with success and built stories backward from that. And then, of course, there's the poetic camp, those who see the whole idea as symbolic. Whale songs not as literal navigation, but metaphors woven into sagas. The way Odysseus spoke to the wind, not because it answered, but because it felt true. But out here, none of that matters. You're living the argument. You see how real and raw it becomes when the stakes aren't academic, they're survival. A misinterpretation doesn't mean a footnote in a journal. It means 3 more days at sea without land. Without fresh water. Without certainty. The debate intensifies as the sun dips lower. The songs of the whales return, rising in slow, mournful tones beneath the hull. But this time, they are different. You hear it too. Longer intervals. Repetitive flourishes. Something shifted. See, the first sailor says. They're calling us home. No, says the second, shaking his head. That's a boundary song. We've crossed into another pod's water. You suddenly feel like you're listening to 2 critics arguing about a symphony while the orchestra plays on. Are the whales offering guidance? Are they confused? Are they performing? Or are they warning? You ask yourself the question historians have asked for decades: how do you tell the difference between a song meant for whales, and one that humans can, or should, understand? And maybe that's the wrong question. Maybe it was never about what the whales were saying. Maybe it was about how humans listened. The act of listening, of paying attention, might have been the tool. The navigation wasn't in the data, it was in the mindfulness. You remember the chant from days ago. The deep hum mimicking an earlier song. That wasn't a recording, it was a response. A habit. A pattern of attention passed down through generations. Viking seamanship was never about single truths. It was about layering clues. If the whales sang low and the current pushed northeast and the seabirds flew inland, that meant something. Not because of a whale alone, but because of all of it, together. So maybe the scholars who argue are all right. And all wrong. Maybe the whale song was real and metaphor. Tool and myth. Practical and sacred. You're pulled from your thoughts when the captain finally speaks. West, he says firmly. But slow. The argument dies, unanswered. The crew adjusts. The oars slow. The ship glides. And then something happens that nobody can debate. The surface breaks beside the ship, a massive, glistening back emerging like a rising island. Barnacles trail behind the curve. A spray of mist bursts skyward. And a sound, a long, vibrating call, rolls over the ship like thunder under silk. The whale surfaces again, just ahead. Then another joins. Not fleeing. Not feeding. Escorting. For the next hour, the whales swim beside you, singing on and off. Long, even notes. No urgency. No alarm. The crew says nothing. What's there to say? The debate ends, not because someone won, but because the sea gave its own answer. You'll still argue later, of course. That's human nature. And it's Viking nature too. But for now, in this moment, you're not interpreting. You're experiencing. There's no theory. Just sound. Just water. Just giants. Later, back on land, or in the next harbor, you might carve this into story. Add a few embellishments. Say the whales circled the ship 3 times. Say they sang in harmony with the crew. Say their tails glowed like moonlight. But here, tonight, under this sky, with their song in your chest, you don't need stories. You have the truth. Or at least, a truth. One that can't be captured in books or scrolls or debates. Only remembered. And maybe that's what matters most. The next leg of the journey pulls you farther from the familiar. The stars shift subtly at night, and the winds grow colder, salter, tinged with something ancient. Even the crew has changed. Not their faces, not their routines, but their attention. Everyone listens more now. Not just for whale songs, but for everything. The creak of the hull. The flutter of seabirds. The feel of air on the back of the neck. It's as if the voyage has tuned them, tuned you, into another layer of reality. The whales haven't vanished. They're still there, gliding below, calling at intervals. But the calls are less frequent now. Shorter. And sometimes, there's silence. Not the kind of silence that means absence, but a pause. A holding of breath. At first, it unnerves you. The absence of the comforting bassline makes the sea feel too big, too unknowable again. But then a younger sailor leans over and whispers, "This is what they do when we're on the edge." You blink. The edge of what? He shrugs. Anything. Everything. Turns out, silence from the whales doesn't mean disinterest, it means transition. Vikings came to recognize this pattern, long periods of calls as you enter a known zone, then silence as the whales cross into unfamiliar water or shift their behavior. It's as if they, too, are feeling their way forward. So now you listen to the silence. But you're also learning something else. Whale song was never used in isolation. The Vikings layered it with other systems, many of them astonishingly sophisticated. Take wave reading, for example, hafilla, as they called it, the sea's confusion. It describes how waves change near land, reflecting off hidden shores or wrapping around islands. The crew knows how to read that pattern with their feet, their balance, the tension in their legs. And yes, combined with whale song, it becomes a kind of multisensory sonar. Stars, too, come back into play. One night, as clouds part and constellations re-emerge, the navigator begins pointing silently to specific stars, then comparing them to the frequency of whale calls from earlier in the evening. He's matching patterns, not just visually, but temporally. It's as if the sky and sea are working together. Historians still don't fully understand how much cross-referencing Vikings used between celestial and acoustic cues, but there are enough hints, through saga metaphors and oral traditions, to suggest it was real. And remarkably advanced. Imagine navigating a world where you had no maps, no compass, no sonar, but you had everything else: instinct, stars, songs, wind, wave, bird, bone. And the more you lean into that, the more you feel how layered Viking navigation really was. It wasn't about precision in the modern sense, it was about attunement. You weren't calculating, you were communing. This idea unsettles some modern scholars. The notion that Vikings weren't just pragmatic seafarers, but emotional, almost spiritual sailors, people who felt their way through the sea with empathy for nature, doesn't fit the standard narrative. But here's the truth: the more evidence you experience, the more obvious it becomes. The whale songs weren't just data, they were dialogue. One evening, with the sea calm and the sails slack, the ship drifts silently. No orders are given. Everyone's listening. And then, faintly, the whales begin again. Not just one this time. A group. Maybe 5. Their calls interlace in tight patterns, rising and falling, then echoing. It sounds playful. Social. Almost welcoming. The old sailor, your bearded friend from the early days, chuckles softly. They're saying we're not alone. And he's right. Moments later, seabirds arrive. Then a school of herring passes under the boat, glittering in the dim light. Dolphins arc in the distance. It's as if the ocean is throwing a quiet festival. And the whales? They're the hosts. Some among the crew say these are song clusters, specific acoustic gatherings used by whales to mark particularly rich regions. Not just feeding grounds, but meeting grounds. And yes, Vikings knew about them. They marked them mentally, some even carving runes to match the rhythms of specific pods who sang there year after year. It's like discovering the whale version of a hometown jingle, and knowing it by heart. You begin to suspect the whales aren't just tools of navigation, they're characters in the story. Sentinels. Elders. They travel through regions the way Vikings travel through sagas, repeating, refining, retelling. And the sailors have learned to honor that. One fascinating debate among modern whale researchers focuses on song evolution. Whale songs don't stay the same. They morph. Sometimes quickly. Sometimes in waves that sweep across entire oceans. What if Viking sailors witnessed this in real time? What if they noticed that the whales they once relied on changed their tunes from season to season, and what if the sailors adjusted with them? This opens up a wild, thrilling possibility, that Viking navigation wasn't static. It was alive. It moved with the whales. Adapted. Updated. Like downloading new map data every few months, except you're getting it from a barnacled choir below deck. But with all this fluidity came a new challenge, memory. How do you pass on navigation techniques that literally change their melody? You observe the answer firsthand. The sailors don't just chant anymore. They mimic. With bone flutes. With stringed lyres. One man even uses his voice to hum frequencies between notes. It's a game. A practice. A tradition. And a necessity. They're building a mental library, not of fixed songs, but of tones and structures. A grammar of whale song. And even as the whales change their verses, the syntax remains. The rhythm, the intervals, the feel. This is where the sailors prove their mastery. They're not memorizing, they're translating in real time. And so are you. Because now, when the whales sing differently, you don't panic. You lean into it. You ask, why the shift? What changed? What are they sensing that we haven't? And often, they're right. Storms. Currents. Ice. All hinted at in the layers of their calls before your eyes even detect them. This, perhaps, is the final layer of Viking navigation, not just multisensory, not just instinctual, but relational. A partnership between humans and the deep. One based not on dominance, but listening. And as your ship sails quietly beneath a curtain of stars, flanked by ancient singers, you realize that you're not exploring the sea. You're being invited into it. The sea holds its breath today. There's no wind. The surface is mirror smooth. Even the birds are quiet. You drift forward, oars at rest, sail limp, listening for a song that doesn't come. No whales. Not a hum. Not a click. Not even the distant echo of one moving through deeper water. It's as if they've all disappeared. The crew is unsettled. You wouldn't expect it, given how much they trust in their ability to read the stars, the waves, the clouds. But without the whales, something feels off. As if the background music to their entire worldview has suddenly been muted. A layer of guidance has vanished. Maybe it's time, one sailor mutters. Maybe the giants are done with us. And that right there is the hard truth the Vikings knew better than anyone, what is learned can also be lost. It didn't happen all at once, of course. Whale-based navigation wasn't suddenly declared obsolete like an out-of-date chart tossed overboard. It eroded slowly, generation by generation. As voyages expanded, as settlements became permanent, as stories became more romantic than instructive, the old instincts dulled. The chants grew fainter. The carved symbols became decorations instead of code. Eventually, only the myths remained. You're seeing that erosion now. The ship anchors near a rocky outcropping for rest. The crew doesn't speak of it directly, but you see it in the way they glance toward the water, waiting for a sound that never arrives. One man hums softly to himself, a whale song mimic, but no one joins him. The spell, at least for now, is broken. And then, in the quiet that follows, a strange idea forms. What if this is how it always ended? Not with a storm. Not with disaster. But with silence. Historians today admit that we don't really know when the tradition of whale song navigation ended, if it even existed in the structured way we imagine. Some argue that by the time sagas were written down, the practice had already vanished, leaving only traces in poetry and folklore. Others believe remnants of it survived well into the Greenland settlements, slowly fading as maritime priorities shifted from exploration to trade and territory. But here's the most interesting part: we're starting to rediscover it. In recent years, researchers have revisited Old Norse texts and carvings, finding strange rhythms embedded in them, repetitive syllables, unusual line breaks, tonal notations that hint at acoustic memory. Some marine biologists have even teamed up with linguists to compare whale call patterns with Nordic oral structures, uncovering eerie parallels. And then there's the tech. Modern hydrophones, underwater microphones, have been deployed to track whale migrations for decades. But now, some are using them to recreate historical soundscapes. By analyzing how whale calls would have echoed through Viking hulls, we're starting to hear what they might have heard. It's speculative, yes, but it offers something rare, a chance to feel the past, not just read about it. Some experimental sailors have taken this further. They've built replica Viking ships and sailed known migration routes while listening for whales in real time. And in some cases, they've reported changes in direction, based on those whale cues, that led them straight to hidden fjords and harbors, just as the sagas suggest. Coincidence? Maybe. Or maybe the ocean hasn't forgotten. You find yourself thinking about the crew now, and how the silence affects them differently. The older sailors sit still, remembering. The younger ones fidget, looking to instruments. It's a metaphor for something bigger, how our connection to nature shifts over time, how we replace instinct with measurement, trust with calculation. But that doesn't mean the knowledge is lost forever. Just as the ocean changes its rhythms, so do we. What fades can be revived. What's buried can be uncovered, if we're still listening. Later that evening, as the sun bleeds orange across the western sky, you gather with a few others at the ship's edge. You hum softly, not trying to copy the whales, just echoing the cadence you remember. To your surprise, others join in. The song builds slowly. A mix of tones and silence. No meaning. No map. Just presence. And in that presence, something shifts. No whales return that night. No echoes rise from the deep. But somehow, that's okay. Because you've remembered how to listen. That may be the beginning of something. Or the end. Some scholars say whale-based navigation disappeared because of hubris. Humans stopped believing we needed nature. Others say it was just practicality, new tools, new priorities. But maybe it wasn't a loss at all. Maybe it was hibernation. Waiting for the right moment, the right ears, to hear again. One day, someone else will stand where you are, on a ship, on the edge of the world, and wonder what the ocean is trying to say. And maybe this time, they'll listen. The sky is full of motion tonight. Waves flicker under starlight. Clouds drag low across the moon. The ship cuts a steady line through the black water, no longer lost, no longer waiting, but moving with quiet purpose. Not toward a known destination, but toward curiosity. Toward discovery. And now, in this strange in-between where old knowledge has faded but the hunger remains, something remarkable happens. The whales return. You don't see them at first. You feel them. A vibration. A low-frequency ripple in your ribs. The kind of sound that makes you instinctively pause and listen harder, without knowing why. Then, in the darkness off starboard, a column of mist rises, illuminated silver in the moonlight. The calls follow moments later. They're not the same as before. Not quite. The rhythms are more drawn out, the tones deeper. But they are unmistakably intentional. The song is complex, layered, responsive, curious. You sense it isn't just a broadcast. It's a conversation. And now, here's the part that sends goosebumps up your spine, the crew recognizes it. The old man with the carved belt gives a quiet gasp. That's the old route, he says. The younger sailors tilt their heads. They've never heard this pattern before. But the older ones? They remember. Turns out, this whale song, this specific melody, was thought to be extinct. It hasn't been heard in years. Not even among the surviving chants. Yet here it is, echoing up from the deep. An acoustic ghost. A memory, made real again. You learn later that marine scientists have actually documented similar returns of ancient song types, cultural revivals, among whale pods. Songs once widespread, lost for a generation, suddenly re-emerging, reshaped but familiar. And now, the same is happening here. Not in a lab. Not in a lecture. But live. The sailors scramble to replicate the call, not with instruments, but with their own voices. A mix of throat singing, low humming, improvised chant. They're not mimicking. They're joining in. And the whales answer. It's not dramatic. No breach. No display. Just one more long, deliberate note. And somehow, that says everything. This is no longer navigation. It's communion. It's not about direction. It's about connection. You're witnessing what historians, scientists, and skeptics alike have long dismissed as romantic myth, an interaction between species separated by millions of years of evolution, yet capable of recognizing something in one another. A rhythm. A respect. The captain quietly changes course, not because he has to, but because he wants to follow. He trusts this song more than any chart. And no one questions him. As the ship turns gently west, you remember something you read, or maybe just heard whispered once. Sometimes the way forward is a return. A revival of something nearly forgotten. A second chance to honor what was always there, patiently waiting. Modern researchers would give anything to be here right now. Hydrophones would be deployed. Sonograms recorded. Frequencies plotted. But none of that matters tonight. Because this is not data. This is story. And in this moment, you're living it. The sailors begin to share their interpretations, mixing science with intuition. Some say the whales are guiding the crew toward feeding grounds. Others claim it's a test, see if the humans still remember how to follow. Still others believe it's an offering. A gift. Historians would argue endlessly about that, about meaning, evidence, probability. But standing here, surrounded by moonlight and melody, those arguments feel small. This isn't something you prove. It's something you experience. You think of how many other whale songs were lost over the centuries. How many chants slipped through the cracks of memory. How many traditions faded because the world got louder, ships got bigger, engines noisier, priorities narrower. But this? This is hope. Because if one song can return, maybe others will too. Not just in water, but in culture. In us. Maybe we can relearn what we once knew, how to listen to the world not as a resource to exploit, but as a partner to learn from. Maybe whales aren't guides to physical land, but to something deeper, resonance, humility, the courage to not always know. The longship sails on, now fully in tune with the call. The chant has changed. It's more confident. The crew is no longer chasing or second-guessing. They are responding. Mirroring. Participating. And you? You've stopped trying to analyze. You're simply present. One of the crew, a young man barely past boyhood, leans beside you and whispers, "They remembered us." You look at him, startled. But he doesn't mean the whales. He means the sailors. The songs. The sea. Something that was almost lost, now remembered. Revived. And alive. The ship drifts now, sails half-dropped, more glider than vessel. You've entered a part of the sea that doesn't belong to maps or kingdoms. There are no landmarks, no known islands nearby. Just open water, stretching into forever. And yet, no one is worried. Because the whales are still singing. Their voices trail behind and ahead, above and below, thick with depth and memory. There's something ceremonial about the tone now, less urgent, more reverent. It sounds like farewell. Or maybe welcome. It's hard to tell with creatures that speak in vibrations you feel more than hear. You lean over the side of the ship and watch the sea pulse in the moonlight. For the first time, you realize that the surface is not a boundary, it's a mirror. And beneath it, entire lives are lived in silence and song. The whales don't just travel. They remember. Across centuries. Across oceans. Tonight, you're part of that memory. The crew senses it too. No one speaks. The usual jests, the firelit chants, even the idle talk of women and farms back home, gone. Each man listens. Eyes half closed. Breathing slow. As if afraid to break the spell. Then, gently, as if on cue, the ship slows and eases into stillness. Oars come in. Ropes are tied loosely. Everyone turns to the water. You spot them first, two massive backs arching in the silver swells. Then a third. A fourth. They move in a wide arc around the ship, not diving, not breaching, just circling. Escorting. One exhales, and the plume catches the moonlight like incense rising from the altar of the world. There's a story some Vikings tell of a place far across the sea, an unreachable shore that only reveals itself when called by a sacred song. Not a paradise, not a heaven. Just a quiet harbor where time slows, and everything forgotten remembers itself again. That's where you are now. The final place the whales bring you. It's not marked on any map. There's no treasure. No lush fields or gold-lined cliffs. Just a cove, hidden by high rock and heavy mist. The kind of place you could sail past 1,000 times and never see, unless you were led. The whales stop singing. Their silence is not emptiness. It is completion. The crew drops anchor, gently. Not because they need to, but because it feels right. The ship rocks softly. A few men climb down, wading through shallows. The sand beneath your feet is dark and fine, scattered with shells. Everything is still. Then the sky opens. Not with rain, not with thunder, but with light. The clouds part, and the northern lights pour down like silk unfurling across the stars. Green, violet, silver, colors you have no names for dance across the sky. The water glows. The rocks shimmer. The ship seems to exhale. You lie down on the sand, arms spread wide, and stare upward, feeling the last whale song in your bones fade like an echo. You're not tired. Just, complete. The crew begins to sing, not loud, not in harmony. Just small sounds. Low, steady, instinctive. The old chant. The ancient rhythm. And even the youngest among them knows it now. They will remember. You will remember. In the coming days, this land will be explored. Mapped, perhaps. Settled. The journey will be told and retold, embellished, surely. Someone will say the whales spoke. Someone will swear they saw a whale shed a tear. Someone will say the whole thing was luck, or instinct, or madness. But you will know. You were there. You listened. You followed. And you arrived. Because long before the world was carved up into borders and trade routes, there were songs. Long before steel hulls and sonar, there were gentle giants humming to one another in the dark, tracing invisible highways through the deep. And long before you ever believed in such things, they believed in you. So now, as the fire crackles low, as sleep tugs gently at the corners of your mind, as the stars settle into their ancient rhythm, you let go. You close your eyes. And drift, weightless. Cradled by waves. Watched by whales. And remembered by the sea. Let yourself breathe slower now. The journey's over, but the ocean still rocks you gently. The ship, the whales, the chants, they've faded into the quiet space behind your eyelids. The stars above are dimming, one by one, like lanterns being tucked in for the night. You're safe now. No more storms to outrun. No more courses to chart. Just the hush of waves lapping at the shore, and the low rhythm of a world that has always known where it's going, even when you didn't. You might still hear the echoes of the whales, far below. That's okay. Let them hum you into stillness. Let them guide you back through the layers of sleep, deep, quiet, warm. This place you've reached? You don't have to name it. It doesn't have to be mapped. It's enough to know you got there. That you listened, that you trusted, that you followed something older than memory. You've traveled well tonight. And now, the sea closes softly around the story like a blanket. Nothing more to do. Nothing more to find. Just the dark. And the drift. And the dream.